All right, y'all, welcome back. Today's going to be Unit 4, Day 16. Some reminders before we get started. As always, make sure you have your history notebook out. You're taking notes as you move through the video. Make sure you complete the vocabulary for this video, highlighted in your notes, or written down on a flashcard for you to study. So let's go ahead and get started for today. So our terms for today are going to be global north and south, neocolonialism, the Bandung Conference, Kwame Nkrumah, Kenyatta, Zaire, Mandela, Apartheid, and the ANC. Concepts for today are going to be neocolonialism and its effects, and Africa after World War II. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about we're going to go over neocolonialism and its results after World War II. So let's start off talking about the global North and South. Here's a little map to help you out. The global North and South is a term that geographers and historians use to divide the world into countries. In the north part of the world and the countries in the south part of the world. This is not necessarily north and south in terms of direction. This is more of a socio-economic and political divide. The global north is made up of countries like America, Canada, Europe, Israel, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, New Zealand, and Australia. The global south includes the continent of Africa, most of Latin America, and developing Asia and the Middle East. The reason they divided the world like this instead of saying like they used to, where they divided it first world, which was fully developed and even post-developed nations, second world, where it was developing nations, and third world, where it was undeveloped countries. Uh, the global north, they divided it this way where it's more of power control. The global north has most of the power. 4 of the 5 seats in the UN Security Council, which those are the 5 countries that can veto stuff in the United Nations, are held by global northern countries, except for China. Most of the global northern countries are first world or second world nations. The global north has 1/4 of the world's population, but they control 80% of the income and 90% of the manufactured industries. So they are very powerful politically and economically. And we're going to talk about the divide between global north and south after World War II and how the global south is still trying to catch up. So we're going to talk about Africa. In Africa, they're caught in the conflict between America and the Soviet Union. Nationalist leaders in Africa are going to have very few choices but to accept capital from either the United States or Communist Russia. This is known as neocolonialism. Even though these countries are either independent or going to become independent, by 1960, which is known as kind of the year of Africa, where these countries have really become independent, they're still having to rely on America or Russia for economic aid. Most of these countries are still exporting raw resources. A lot of these countries do turn to dictatorships and are still corrupt. There's also still very much a proto-colonial government. They're still dependent economically on other countries, and in their economic dependencies, African and Asian nations after World War II are going to fare fairly poorly economically in the global market. Right, these neo-colonial economies are going to be producing raw resources. The world economy is dominated by these industrial nations, the global north. And there have been some countries in Africa and Asia that have tried to find an alternative path. These countries have often worked with the People's Republic of China, Communist China, which have actually kind of broken off from Russia and remained neutral during the Cold War. Other countries have tried to find a neutral path in the Bandung Conference in 1959. Which kind of came to fruition in 1959 and 1955, these unaligned nations were started by India, Egypt, Yugoslavia, and other countries like Albania and Pakistan later on. They're going to try to remain neutral during the Cold War. This is called non-alignment, and they're not going to be aligned to either America or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This middle path, this is going to be the Bandung Conference. This is going to upset America a lot. And the American idea is you're not with us, you're against us. And you're a communist nation, but they will still attempt to maintain that neutrality during the Cold War. Here's a map of that kind of sides during the Cold War. Right, here's an economic map of the different economic worlds: first world, second world, third world, fourth world, fifth worlds. Um, here's a map of decolonization right here. So let's talk about the political history of Africa after World War II. Let's start by talking about Ghana, the French, Ghana and Nigeria. The French were in Africa. The Algerians wanted independence from the French. The French did not want to give up Algeria. This is at the same time they're fighting the Vietnamese in Southeast Asia. The French in the 1950s and 60s will grant independence to all of those countries except Algeria. In 1954, Algerians will revolt. They'll do guerrilla-style warfare against the French, and the Algerians. For the Algerians, 8,000 Algerian Muslims will die. The war will last from 1954 to 1962. 198,000 will die in 1954. The Algerian nationalists will launch guerrilla warfare against the French rule. This will eventually cause a toppling of the French government in 1962, but in 1958 there will be over 500,000 French troops committed to the conflict. Again, in 1962, Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the French, will create a new government in France. He will pull France out of Algeria, and Algeria is going to get their independence under the National Liberation Front. The National Liberation Front was their independence political party / army. This was a Muslim organization, but it was also meant to be more secular. They will take power, and unfortunately, they will become a dictatorship. Moving to Kenya, there will be anti-colonial rebellion in Kenya. Kenya was originally owned by the British. There will be violent clashes between the natives, the Mau Mau, and European settlers after 1947. The big event that will happen is the Mau Mau massacre. Britain is going to kill a lot of the Mau Mau Kenyan Africans. The British are going to support America. We're going to get the support of America because Britain did not want to give up Kenya at first by saying that the Kenyans were communists, which is going to bring America to help them. The Mau Mau's will have their uprising, will be crushed in 1955 due to superior European arms. Over 12,000 Africans will be killed. The person who will lead the independence movement in Kenya is going to be Jomo Kenyatta. He will lead both a violent and somewhat peaceful uprising, and eventually Kenya will gain its independence, and Kenyatta will become the president of Kenya. So let's talk about Kwame Nkrumah. He's going to get independence in Ghana in 1956. This was originally called the Gold Coast, but he will change his country's name back to its historical name of Ghana. He was the leader of Ghana's independence movement. Ghana will become one of the first independent countries in Africa, and Nkrumah's career is going to typify the career of most African leaders. He started off as a democratic reformer, a nationalist who promised democracy in Africa and economic reform. Over time, more people will protest against him, and not wanting to lose his power, he would become more authoritarian. He will turn his country into a one-power state and eventually be overthrown. After independence, he realized that he could not deliver on all of his promises. As a leftist, America and Western nations disliked him. He also faced dissent from rival ethnic groups that wanted Ghana to break up into smaller rival ethnic countries. So based off like tribal and kinship and ethnic divides. Ghana got a lot of their money from coca, which it exported. But when its value begins to fall and fail, Nkrumah is going to lose a lot of money. He's going to become increasingly dictatorial. He'll seek mass support by referencing to African norms of culture and pan-nationalism. He'll tinker with socialism. He'll attempt to form a cult of personality for himself and by himself. He'll try to make himself more of an object of veneration in Ghana. In 1966, he will leave on a mission to meet with other foreign leaders. When he leaves, a military coup will oust him and power, and he will die in exile. You'll see this happen a lot in other countries where they have independence. They'll start off as a democratic movement, and then, like, the military will seize power. Then you'll have a dictatorship that rises. Other examples of this happening is going to be Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Kenyatta became sort of like that. You'll have Mobutu in Zaire. And we're going to talk about Zaire here in a little bit. But this kind of becomes kind of the typical kind of life cycle of a newly independent African country. So this map shows a lot of one-party states. So this is like totalitarianism, autocratic governments. You'll see this happening in Eastern Europe, Africa, which is going to have. You also see this a lot in Latin America as well. All right, so let's talk about Zaire, or the Republic of the Congo. The first prime minister of the Congo was a socialist. He was not liked as a communist, and America did not like him. So the CIA is going to support generals in the Congo to overthrow the democratic elected government. They're going to assassinate him. JFK is going to know about this and support it. What happens when you overthrow a government? You have a civil war. The dictator, who was a colonel, Mobutu, will rule from 1965 to 1977. He'll plunder Zaire's economy, and he will be supported by the United States. In 1997, he's ousted. He'll be ousted by Lawrence Kabila. He'll change his country from Zaire back to Congo. Kabila will be killed in 2001. He'll be replaced by his son. They will not have an election. His son is a dictator. There's been a civil war in the Congo. It's killed up to 20 million people in the Congo. The Congo is an example of a post-colonial nation that is also known as a failed state. If you look at a map, you'll see the country of the Congo. But it doesn't really exist. There's no real government outside the capital. Anarchy kind of exists. It's more of anarchical. Now let's talk about Nigeria. Nigeria is another country that achieved its independence in 1960. World War II was going to bring pressure for independence. Nigeria has had problems after independence with ethnic and religious tension. The Muslims dominate the south while the Christians dominate the north. The north is more industrialized and wealthier than the south, and this is going to lead to ethnic rivalries and corruption. It has led to military coups in 1965, followed by a civil war. From 1966 to 1999, there's been military governments, coups, dictatorships. It's all over the place. So let's talk about South Africa. 1960, South Africa will become a dominion. It will gain full independence from Britain. It's still part of the Treaty of Westminster in the United Kingdom. It's more symbolic. It has full independence now. Countries like South Africa and Rhodesia get independence, but they're going to do apartheid. Apartheid is segregation where rights will be completely separated from blacks. Blacks cannot vote. They're treated as second-class citizens. The government in South Africa is going to develop a police state, funded by the mineral wealth of the nation, with a lot of gold and diamonds in South Africa. The government's going to declare African political parties illegal, like the African National Congress. They're going to imprison leaders of political parties such as Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu, and other ANC leaders are going to be killed. Mandela and Sisulu will be arrested and put in jails for over 20 years. Over time, international organizations will begin to mount a protest against countries like Rhodesia and South Africa. It's not as these governments are going to become increasingly repressive, but more and more Western nations will turn against them. because by the 1980s, most people realize that segregation is wrong. Who would have figured? And there would be a global boycott of South Africa. The government will try to soften some of its attitudes. And in the late 1880s, the moderate African white leaders, F.W. de Klerk, is going to pass reforms. He's going to release the nation. He's going to release Nelson Mandela in 1990s. He'll start negotiating with black political parties. He's going to allow free elections by 1994. The African National Congress is going to win, and they are going to end apartheid. Nelson Mandela will become the first president of the fully democratic South Africa. Right? So let's talk a little bit about South Africa after World War II. South Africa after World War II is going to be called the Rainbow Nation because it's very multicultural. Everybody comes together. There will be one of the archbishops, Desmond Tutu, who is the archbishop of the Episcopalian Church. He's black. He was one of the leaders of independence movements against apartheid. He's going to come up with the phrase Rainbow Nation. He wanted to bring all the Africans together, the whites and blacks. Nelson Mandela also used this phrase. He did not want blacks to try to get revenge on the whites. He wanted everyone to come together, value all aspects of the culture. And South Africa under Mandela, under Tutu, have tried to do this. Under Mandela, the African National Congress will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996 to 2003. This emphasized restorative justice. It was not about victor's justice. It was not about punishing nor executing people. The purpose of this commission was to bear witness, to record human rights crimes, and offer reparations and rehabilitations to the victims of racism and violence. Witnesses were called for to make testimonies about human rights violation, and perpetrators can give testimony for immunity. This was not about getting revenge. This was about recognizing what happened to make sure it never happened again in world history. There were over 1,000 public hearings and over 19,000 public violations were admitted to during this time, and it was very, for the most part, a successful commission that healed the nation of South Africa. Right, this shows some of the violence in Africa, right, especially in the Congo and in the 20th century. That's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you very much for listening and taking your notes. If you have any questions, please ask, and I'll see you guys in class. All right.